2026 WCBL regular season is behind us as we have the playoffs approaching at a rapid pace. It all kicks off Friday, which is tomorrow, and it's an exciting time of year for 8 teams who believe they have a chance to win the Harry Hallis Trophy this year. Obviously, with the Regina Red Sox winning last year as a non-top seeded team, any team can win, and all 8 teams have a shot as of now. Again, round 1 starts off tomorrow night, Friday night, across the prairies, and it's an exciting time. So let's bring in my co-host for the program today, Joe McFarland, who has all the insights we're going to want for all the matchups across the West and East Division as we enter it. Joe, it was a record-breaking season across the board. We had a bunch of records broken on individual stats, some really, really interesting storylines on the records of the teams heading right down to the very last day. First off, just tell me about your thoughts on the season overall as we enter the playoffs.
Kind of almost like a tale of 2 seasons, right? Because the first half of this season, like right up until Canada Day, we were going, are we going to have like teams with 20 games played because of how many rainouts we've had and how much the weather was playing a factor in so much during June? And then it was like Canada Day happened and the skies opened up and everything went really well for the most part, aside from the Edmonton region, which seemed to get blasted virtually every single day. Poor Energy City having to deal with all of that. But overall, a really competitive season. And I think one that was maybe more shocking when it comes to the East. We kind of thought at some point that Regina, Med Hat would finally kind of catch some fire at some point, and they never really did. And so it became a bit of a nail biter at the end of the season there, right up until the last day. And I like it when it comes down to that last day. There was so much intrigue going into it, and as it turns out, it was the Medicine Hat Mavericks who managed to come out and claim that 4th seed in the East. Although in the West, not as competitive because that was decided by the weekend with Energy City getting that 4th spot.
Yeah, for sure. And just a quick apology on my behalf. We put out the WCBL game day video yesterday. I misunderstood the tiebreaker conversation. I said Weyburn had the tiebreaker over Medicine Hat. Medicine Hat had the tiebreaker. So, but you know what, Joe? It didn't even matter because Medicine Hat lost their game yesterday and Weyburn lost both their games yesterday. So it didn't even come into effect. But anyways, just wanted to say that, just so get that out of the way. Why don't we have a look at how the season wrapped up over the last few days? We'll start with Monday because, like you said, there were some storylines going all the way to the very last games. So let's have a look here. The Energy City Cactus Rats put themselves into a great situation, basically capping it all off for their playoff hopes, or postseason hopes, I should say, as they won a doubleheader against the Fort Mac Giants. Okotoks, maybe this is a message-sending kind of win, a 7-3 win over Sylvan Lake on Monday. Lethbridge with a 4-2 win over Medicine Hat. Regina with a 13-5 win over Saskatoon. And who knows, if Saskatoon was fully into it on that night, but Regina may be saying, hey, we did it last year in the playoffs, we can do it again in case we see ya. So there's a message-sending win, I would say, as well. Then in a doubleheader, Weyburn really needed both of these wins. They only got the one, but it was a big one. Moose Jaw got a 6-1 win, and then Weyburn got an 11-3 win. And then Swift Current, I think at this point, if I'm not mistaken, they still had playoff hopes alive at this point. It was a 14-9 win over Brooks. So it made Tuesday night even all that more interesting. So we'll switch over to Tuesday. A doubleheader in Brooks as Lethbridge and Brooks split that one. Moose Jaw, whoa, they didn't want to leave anything to doubt. 22-5 win. Excuse me, over the Regina Red Sox. Joe, if you wouldn't mind maybe taking over, I got a cough coming on. I'm gonna let you take over here.
Of course, and we'll go down the list here with Sylvan Lake taking on Fort McMurray and getting some retribution after that loss to Okotoks the night before, a 7-1 win as they started that 3-game set against the Fort McMurray Giants, and then, or 2-game set, pardon me. And then it was Swift Current with the 12-10 win over Medicine Hat, another big win for the 57s and making Medicine Hat's life miserable going into the last couple of games of the season. Okotoks with a 12-7 victory over Energy City, getting some retribution for an earlier loss during the weekend to those same Cactus Rats. And then the final matchup, Weyburn staying alive in the playoff race with a squeaker 4-3 win over Saskatoon. And we'll wrap things up with that Wednesday night, the final day of the regular season. Who's going to win? Who's going to get that 4th place in the East Division, and Weyburn makes the decision a little bit easier with that 6-5 loss to Regina. So they end up not getting into the playoffs. Regina picking up a second win as well to wrap up their season. Swift Current wraps up their season on a high note with a 2-game winning streak over Medicine Hat, 8-7 final there. Okotoks sending a message to Energy City as they head into a first-round playoff bout, 9-2 the decision there. With Lethbridge needing some wins to wrap up the season, and they did so in fine fashion, a 14-3 win over Brooks. Saskatoon picks up the 11-2 win over Moose Jaw, which again kind of gets the wheels in motion heading into the playoffs and sends a message to the number one team in the East Division. And finally, a very much depleted Fort McMurray Giants team. When I was in Sylvan Lake for that one, and that team saw some guys leave. They got to go back to college, all that kind of thing. So the roster was pretty thin. Sylvan Lake taking full advantage and coming away with a 10-0 victory. Clark, I got to say this. Hopefully you're back on and ready to rock and roll. But
Yeah.
a couple of storylines that I wanted to add on to this, a couple of cool ones out of both Lethbridge and Okotoks last night. What I love is when teams go and honor their 4 or 5 year starters, the guys who've been around for a while. And two in particular got to do something pretty special on when Caleb Haney in Lethbridge and Ricky Sanchez in Okotoks got to play all 9 positions during their respective games last night. I've been texting back and forth with Caleb Haney just because I want to do a story for Dugout Stories and for the WCBL website. And I asked, what position scared you the most? Fully expecting that it was going to be the pitcher. He actually said catcher.
Yeah.
I'll get more into I've asked why. And so he said he did a bullpen session against Brooks the night before just to get used to it. But I would have thought pitcher would be a little bit more crazy. But I guess catching is a bit of a niche market, we'll call it that. So cool stories. And I love those personal stories too. The ones where it's like, hey, let's honor some of the guys who've been around for a while.
Yeah, definitely. And I caught one time when I was like 6 years old, got hit in the inside of the knee, never did it again. That was my line in the sand. I am never catching ever again.
Are you crying?
Yeah. So, anyways,
Yeah.
it's not my thing.
Crying in
So
baseball.
I didn't cry, Bryce, but it wasn't a fun time.
The guys in the back are on fire already, and we're not even 5 minutes into this show.
Yeah, they have a good time back there. Speaking of Bryce, I was just chatting with him the other day, and it's about the cough. I don't know what it is, but I think the last couple of years, I've picked up some allergies, and Bryce and I were chatting about how at this time of year, I don't know what it is in the air, but something's going on, and so I've picked up this like weird allergy, and every like once a season in terms of the baseball season, it seems like I have a show where I just can't stop coughing the whole show. So I'm hoping that it's not that bad today. But let's have a look, Joe, at the hitting leaderboards and the pitching leaderboards to wrap up the season, because there were some record-breaking seasons this year. Not just league-wide, but like guys were breaking team records left and right. Obviously, the ones league-wide you'll see at the top of these leaderboards. But like Brady Bye, for example, he broke the Regina Red Sox RBI record, which was long-standing. And some other guys around the league broke their own team records as well. Carter Roth, I believe, broke the Medicine Hat Mavericks doubles record, if I'm not mistaken.
And league record, too.
And yeah, right, the league record. I think there were some other records broken as well. But go over these names that you see here and some of the special seasons we saw on the field this year.
Yeah, just give it into context for Thomas Soto here, as Braden DeSonia had the original stolen base record back in 2022. He swiped 42. So for Thomas Soto to go out, and we talked about it a couple of weeks ago when he set the record, it's like, so is he going to hit 50? He came pretty darn close, I got to say. So congratulations, Thomas Soto. Your name is in the record books. And we've talked to Jake Hiramoto here on the show. We had him on last week. If you haven't watched that episode, a great conversation with him. But there's where he stands now. 2 over the original record set back in, I believe, 2019. And so there's 22. That's on the top of the record list. And Jake Hiramoto, again, 77 RBI. That is a new league record. You spoke about team records, and Frankie Giacalone had himself a season to remember in Medicine Hat, and again, was a big piece to why that offense was clicking on so many good cylinders, especially early on in the year. But he kept going throughout, finishes with 14 home runs. I believe believe Ethan Murdoch's 14 would also set the Saskatoon Berries record for home runs in a season, although they've only been around for 3 seasons now. So, but again, some great performances on not just in the batter's box, but also on on the mound. We'll get to that in a second. Just a really cool season to watch guys come into their own and really showcase what they can do here across the league. And especially out east, it felt like there were a lot of them out east. Out west, it wasn't as much because I feel like there's a lot of teams who they had some depth, and so they played with the depth a little bit more, whereas it felt like the east was riding a few more of their horses a little bit longer, and so you end up with some pretty cool records in the grand scheme.
Yeah, we see quite a few Moose Jaw Miller Express logos on this one, but let's flip over to the pitching side because there's even more over there. Weston Walls is really the one that stands out as he broke the strikeout record and also was very, very close to breaking the innings pitched record as well. But it's not just him, it's his teammate Jacob Glazner, it's his teammate Nathan Piggio who led the league in saves. A great season for a lot of pitchers. And Joe, just to emphasize your point, look how many players are in the East on this graphic.
And especially and you got to give full marks to the Weyburn Beavers, who unfortunately are not making the playoffs this year. There's got to be 2 teams in the East that don't. But man, oh man, did their pitching come through. I know at the beginning of the season we said, hey, you don't have Ian Heck in the lineup anymore. Hey, you don't have Ethan Webster in the lineup anymore. He went down to Lethbridge. So who's going to be the guy who stands up, or guys who are going to stand up and take the reins for the Weyburn Beavers? Well, thank you, Logan Lynch. Thank you, Josh Pritchard. Thank you, Zach Reichel. Like, there's 3 guys who that team was very excited about, and how they managed to put some wins together and make things very, very interesting heading down the stretch.
Absolutely. And again, great performances and across the board, really great stuff. And Weston Walls, just a quick mention, was announced as this week's Player of the Week for SaskTel in the East. And Nash Crowell was from Okotoks was the Village Brewery Alberta Player of the Week to wrap up the season. So great seasons all around. But Joe, today is the round 1 playoff preview, the postseason preview show. So why don't we get into that now and check out who is going to be facing each other this weekend in the 4 matchups, the 2 in the Play Alberta West Division, the 2 in the Insightric East Division. Let's take a look now as we see the final standings of the year, and we'll go into the matchups from there. As you mentioned, Okotoks, Sylvan Lake, Lethbridge, and Energy City got the spots in the West as Brooks and Fort Mac missed out. And then in the East, Moose Jaw took the Eastern pennant. Saskatoon was very close behind all season long, but Moose Jaw just had a little bit extra oomph near the end of the year to kind of clinch that. Regina, you mentioned earlier, we were wondering if Regina and Medicine Hat were maybe going to catch fire. Regina did start playing some better ball in the last couple of weeks to solidify their 3rd spot. Medicine Hat barely squeaked in. Swift Current did their best to play spoilers, winning the last couple of nights. Weyburn was just right there on the tiebreaker. Again, they didn't quite have the tiebreaker, and they didn't do themselves any favors. They had a doubleheader on the last day of the regular season. They lost both to Regina. So Regina solidified 3rd. They'll take on Saskatoon. Medicine Hat just snuck in, and they're going to face Moose Jaw. What stands out for you before we get into the matchups? Maybe say some nice words, if you will, about the 4 teams that did not make the playoffs this year, Joe, if you want to maybe just start in the West.
Yeah, I'll start in the West, and I'll go a little bit step further and go, a lot of people are probably looking at that 21-33 for Energy City and going, where did all those games come from?
Right.
And there's been a little bit of conversation around that. And so what ended up happening at the end of the season, because they didn't have any bearing on the outcomes of the season or the standings at all, is that there were a handful of games, I think 4 in particular, 2 against Okotoks, I know for sure, and I think 2 against Lethbridge, perhaps. There's a handful of games there that were considered forfeits. And again, there's part of it was weather, and part of it was, is the field ready to be played on? And I know at the end of the season there, the games were moved from Energy City to Red Deer for a couple and to Sylvan Lake for a couple. There was some concerns around the field. I know Lethbridge, for example, on a Sunday a couple of weeks ago, they ended up not the game was deemed unplay, or the field was deemed unplayable, and so Lethbridge went home. So in all of that, the conversations were had about are these actual rainouts or are these actual forfeits because the field isn't ready? And so the league had meetings and that kind of stuff. I wasn't privy to any of them, but my understanding is that's the differentiation between a rainout and a forfeit. And so you'll see on the WCBL's website, when you look at the schedules, you'll see FFT, I believe, is the shorthand for forfeit. I think there's 6 in there. So that's how Energy City gets to 54, 56 games, because there was a couple of actual legit rainouts by the end. In terms of the teams, I liked what Brooks brought to the table.
Yeah.
It felt as though they didn't really catch enough steam early enough. And we talked about it really early on is, hey, those early wins can come back, or early season losses can come back and bite you or do you really well. And for Brooks, it felt like that. By the end for Fort McMurray, and I mentioned it off the top, is they were a very depleted team by the end of the season there. They were playing some position players as pitchers and pitchers as position players. I think they had maybe 14 guys on the roster last night in Sylvan Lake. It's just a numbers game. And when you get this late in the season, you do have that roster churn. It always happens, but it really seemed to impact the Fort McMurray Giants. But again, they've got some really cool pieces to the puzzle. On the flip side, hey, hats off to both Swift Current and Weyburn, because they made life absolutely miserable for the Regina Red Sox and Medicine Hat Mavericks down the stretch. And that is something to be to put your to tap yourself on the back on. And I think it speaks to, in Swift Current in particular, they've renewed their head coach for a couple of years. They like what they're bringing to the table. So let's continue this ride and see if we can build on something heading into 2027.
Yeah, and just to build on that Swift Current thing a little bit, if you look at the standings page, we looked at the standings graphic earlier. We don't have to bring that up again, but a 21-35 record is an improvement from last year. One thing that I think is extremely misleading when you look at Swift Current is their run differential. They had the worst run differential in the league, but watching them play several times, you wouldn't know it. They were a really exciting team. Yeah, I think they ran into some nights where maybe they were throwing some really young arms. And maybe guys that maybe got stretched out longer than they were used to or ready for. They had a -205 run differential. But again, I think a lot of that came from a few really, really bad blowouts. But other than that, I think that's a team, to me, Swift Current, with a culture-setting season like this, as you mentioned, extending their coach into the next couple of years, a young team with a lot of chance to bring guys back. Again, the culture just kind of starting to build a little bit there. I like their chances for next year. So I'm just going to give a really big shout out to Swift Current for the way that they handled this year, the way they changed things up from last year. And Jared Franklin did a fantastic job, I think, starting something that we might see turn into something a lot bigger over the next few seasons. So here's hoping. But again, I'm just going to give a huge shout out because I think their run differential is extremely misleading for how their season actually went, especially down the stretch. They went 6-4 in their last 10 games. They were playing fantastic ball. So I just want to give a big shout out to the Swift Current 57s. Okay, let's talk about the playoffs, Joe. Again, this is the postseason preview show. Let's bring up the matchups as we look at the 1 versus 4, the 2 versus 3 on either side. The Okotoks Dogs are going to take on the Energy City Cactus Rats in round 1. The Sylvan Lake Gulls take on the Lethbridge Bulls in a rematch of last year's round 1. I guess both are technically rematches of last year's rounds. And then in Moose Jaw will take on Medicine Hat, and then Saskatoon takes on Regina. So a really interesting couple of matchups. Let's start in the Play Alberta West Division, Joe. Give me your thoughts on Okotoks versus Energy City, which kicks off tomorrow night.
Absolutely. And this series is all going to be in Okotoks. As mentioned, the Energy City Metro Ballpark is not ready to go. So it's part of it is let's limit the costs. Part of it is, hey, we have the infrastructure in place in Okotoks as an example for live streaming, all that kind of stuff. Because otherwise, if you're hosting that game in, say, Sherwood Park or St. Albert or somewhere in Spruce Grove, you've got to set up all that infrastructure, all the tickets, all that kind of stuff, right? And so those are extra costs on a team that is trying to get a stadium built. And so I think that was a primary driver of saying, okay, well, why don't we just bite the bullet on this one and have all 3 games in Okotoks? They've got all the pieces in play. Away you go. Okotoks was 5-1 during the regular season against Energy City. The one loss came last weekend on Saturday when Saul Mata went absolute bananas and had a 7-inning gem in a win for Energy City. Aside from that, it wasn't particularly close in any of those matchups. Now, that being said, the playoffs are a different beast. And if I'm liking this series almost to the one we saw a couple of years ago between Sylvan Lake and Brooks. We went into that series going, oh man, this is not going to be easy for Brooks at all. Sylvan Lake just came off setting the league record for wins. This might be a dusting, right? And Brooks made it interesting. If it wasn't for Josh Tucker throwing a complete game gem in game one, they won 4-0. And then game two, it boiled down to a couple of minor mistakes. One being I think bases loaded balk that scored the first run of the game in the 7th inning. Brooks ended up losing the second game 4-2. This feels sort of like it can go that way if Okotoks takes Energy City for granted. And if Energy City plays like they have, I got to give Jordan Blundell and company a lot of credit for maybe minimizing the noise around the team outside of what's happening on the field, right? They put together some win streaks. They dealt with all the, hey, are we playing here? Hey, are we playing there? They dealt with it in stride. They did what they had to do to get into playoffs. And to them, I give them their tip of the cap. You can't take this team for granted at all. Sylvan Lake, they swept Sylvan Lake in a 2-game set late in the season there. So this is a team that, doesn't have anything to lose. And so Okotoks needs to be really careful about that one. But again, you have an Okotoks Dogs team that won 40-42 games, add in the 2 for the forfeits. And this is a team to be reckoned with. They're always a perennial favorites. So this is a series that it's David versus Goliath, but David might be looking at it going, hey, I've got something to prove here too.
Definitely. Now, last year, I mentioned that there were rematches in the West. Brooks did make it in last year over Energy City. They're in that, if you remember from last year, the last week and a half in the bottom 3 fight for the last playoff spot was ridiculous. It was insane. But it is, Brooks made it in last year. Energy City is in this year. So it's not quite a rematch. But as you mentioned, Energy City to me seems like a team that really could kind of surprise and maybe pull off a win and maybe force a game 3. So something to definitely keep an eye on there. Okotoks, we're unsure exactly how healthy they are. We've heard some rumblings of maybe certain guys maybe not being 100% all the way healthy and ready to go. So we'll have to see. We could see a little bit of a surprise in that one, so keep an eye on it. But as you mentioned, the Dogs overall are a force to be reckoned with. So we'll just have to see if they can pull it all together for game 1 and be ready to roll. Keep an eye on those lineups, though. The other matchup in the West, as the guys just flashed it up there, Sylvan Lake taking on the Lethbridge Bulls. It is a rematch of last year's round 1, which Sylvan Lake ultimately won. But this is a tale of a couple of teams. I think Sylvan Lake seems to have it all going right now. Lethbridge, since they lost Carter Clarehout earlier in the year, it feels like that was a point in the season that kind of just, it didn't shift things all the way bad, but it did kind of shake things up. And Lethbridge never seemed to quite be the same team since that moment. But they do come into the offseason or the postseason playing some pretty solid ball. What can we expect out of these two teams heading into round 1?
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because I was going to say these are two teams who've had two almost starkly different seasons, right? With Sylvan Lake, they were meddling around the 500 mark for the first few weeks of the regular season, and then they caught fire. And in particular, the last 13 games, they went 10-3 after the All-Star break, and that really kind of turned the tide for them. They went on a road trip, I believe it was right before the All-Star break, where they went and split a series against Fort Mac, and then I mentioned they lost 2 to Energy City. And since then, 10-3. So they've clearly got some things figured out. And it feels like they did that last year, right around Canada Day, and just caught absolute fire. On the flip side, Lethbridge was the team to beat for the first couple of weeks of the regular season. And then, as you mentioned, and it wasn't just Carter Clarehout, they had a couple of injuries. Stephen and Drachik, as an example. One of the McTavish brothers got injured. They've had to deal with some things in Lethbridge, and they just haven't really felt as solidly built as maybe they were in the early going. They've shown glimpses of it though, and that's going to be maybe the difference in this series. Is Sylvan Lake? The message here is just, hey, keep doing what you're doing. You've been playing really good ball and really good all around ball. The offense is, in particular, has been really solid, and then their pitching staff has been maybe not depending on the horses as much. We're become so used to seeing Ty Boudreau and Josh Tucker do their thing. It's by committee more now with Sylvan Lake in their pitching staff, but it's been really, really effective for them. On the flip side, I think Lethbridge is going to lean on a guy like Caleb Haney and say, "Hey, we need the veterans, right?" I mentioned Ethan Webster, who played the last few seasons in Weyburn. They're going to lean on a guy like that and say, "Give us 5 or 6 quality innings, limit the damage." Because and another piece to this is these two teams saw each other quite a bit in the stretch run here, and Lethbridge gave up double digits in 3 of the 4 last matchups. So if you can limit the damage from a Sylvan Lake offense perspective, Lethbridge is going to say, "Hey, we got a chance to do this." They don't want to get swept like they did last season. So what do they got to do? They've got to be solid at the bats, and they really have to limit that offense.
4 teams in the West that made the playoffs, Lethbridge gave up the most runs. Now, keep in mind, Energy City didn't play as many games. But regardless of that, the numbers don't lie. So that is something that is going to definitely be a focus, I would say. Maybe even on the other side, as Sylvan Lake, maybe a focus like, hey, if we can get up on these guys and hang on, maybe that's the way we do this. We got to get up early, take advantage of some of that pitching, and maybe see if we can beat them by just like beating up their arms and see what happens there. Like you said, they might be relying on a couple guys, and if Lethbridge can get those performances from a couple of guys, that could be the key for them. You ride a couple of arms, you get lucky, you hang on, you rely on your bats. They did score 427 runs this season, so not a bad offense whatsoever. But if they can get a couple of key performances out of their arms, we might be seeing, I mean, it would be considered an upset if they beat Sylvan Lake, but both of these teams are very, very good ball clubs. So anyways, that's, I think, a very good kind of storyline, I guess, heading into round 1 and Friday night's game 1, is if Lethbridge can get an arm, a big performance from an arm, that could be the key to this series. Okay, let's bring back the series. We'll flip over to the Insightrix East Division. Moose Jaw, after last year's record, of what was it? It was 27-29. They set a franchise record in wins this year, I believe, for the club. They finished in first place with a 41-15 record, and they'll take on, I don't want to say, in my eyes, it's hard for me to put this into the right words. I'm going to say out of the playoff teams, I had higher expectations for Medicine Hat, given how they started the year, given their roster, given the amount of runs they were able to put up on the board for most of the season, especially near the beginning. I thought Medicine Hat's offense was going to power them to a better overall record. They finished with a 22-34 record, Joe. So when you see Moose Jaw, who had a very good season, a very big jump from last year, and Medicine Hat, who took a big step back despite having an otherworldly offense, what do you see in these two teams that you think this matchup's going to be interesting to watch?
Well, and going through the schedule there, it looks like Moose Jaw came away with the season series winning at 7-3. And so by that number, it shouldn't be particularly close. But to your point, these are two really good offenses.
Yeah.
Right? When you think about what the firepower the Medicine Hat does have with a guy like Evan Morrison, like the Volcanoes, like Frankie Giacalone, like you go up and down that roster, and they can go off when they want to. The challenge has been is that it's been a little bit inconsistent. And when you couple that with a pitching staff that hasn't found its footing yet, it's tough to really kind of figure out what this team is going to be. Now, as we learned last year with the Regina Red Sox, is all you need to do is catch fire at the right time, and things are going to go your way really, really fast. And that might be the case for Medicine Hat if you can take advantage of one thing. Because I said Moose Jaw's offense is out of this world. They've got a ton of great veteran presence guys: Thomas Soto, William Edwards, Chris Franks. The list goes on and on. The one thing that I have a question mark around Moose Jaw: did you ride your horses too long? We looked at those stat categories. We looked at how many innings that Weston Walls put up. We looked at the number of innings that Jacob Glazner put on. We also saw Sean Bavis come in a little bit later on, but he had quite a few innings in there as well. Is that a recipe for burning them out? Is that kind of covering up a hole maybe in the bullpen as an example? So if this Medicine Hat offense can take advantage of that and maybe find a fastball that just misses and take it out of the park and maybe run a guy out of the game a couple of innings sooner, does that spell problems for the Moose Jaw Miller Express? I don't know. We'll find out on Friday and Saturday. But it's one of those question marks, I think, heading in is Moose Jaws looks like maybe the most complete team out of the 8 that are remaining. But I have a question as to whether or not those can be ridden for much longer, or how many innings are left in especially a guy like Weston Walls who did set the record or came very close to setting the record for innings pitched in a season.
Yeah, there's definitely like two ways to look at that. I think, as you mentioned, Moose Jaw might be in the best position out of any team in the playoffs, where they have a guy that they can trust to go out and most likely put out a great performance and win game 1 in Weston Walls. And they have a guy in game 2 who's the second best strikeout guy in the league, Jacob Glazner, for game 2. So in that regard, okay, yes, maybe they're very, very confident that they have this in the bag. However, look at Weston Walls' last outing. It was 2.2 innings. He kind of got roughed up a little bit. Yes, he threw 8 strikeouts because the guy is a monster. But he did get roughed up a little bit, and he didn't. Maybe he was record chasing. Maybe he was trying a little too hard. You know how pitchers can be. I'm guessing he's going to be back in fine form come playoff time. However, if Medicine Hat's offense can find it and maybe chase those guys, even one of them, then all of a sudden you're going into a game 3 scenario. If Medicine Hat can pull out a win in one of the first 2, you're going to get into a game 3 scenario where Moose Jaw might have to either go back to whoever pitched in game 1 or go to a guy that maybe isn't at that level of the Glazners and the Walls, and all of a sudden maybe you have an advantage potentially going into game 3. It's going to be really interesting. If Moose Jaw can just do what they do and shut the door defensively and pitching-wise in game 1 and 2 with, like you mentioned, how dynamic their offense is. They got it all. They got base stealing. They got on base. They got contact. They got power. They're going to be playing in front of their home crowd. They've got it all. But if Medicine Hat can maybe find a way to sneak a win out of game 1 or 2, and force a game 3, then all of a sudden maybe the playing field is a little bit evened out. So we're going to have to see. Keep an eye on that. Moose Jaw's, my key to this series is Moose Jaw, don't mess around. Just get this done. Try to win. Obviously, they're going to try to win, but try to get this done in 2, because game 3, all of a sudden, it kind of feels like a Wild Wild West scenario where anything could happen. So clean it up in 2, get it over with, show your strengths, and work with your strengths. That's my keys to that one. Any other thing before we touch on the other series?
No, I think those are the big points. I'm glad you mentioned that last outing for Weston Walls, and you can look at that 2 ways as well, right? As one is, hey, he wanted a short outing so that he's more fresh for this first game, because I suspect he's going to get the ball in game 1, especially at home. Give the hometown fans what they want. On the flip side, to your point, is that the first sign that maybe there's a chink in the armor? So stay tuned for that.
Right, exactly. So yes, definitely going to be something to look for. Like I mentioned, Moose Jaw, they're going to want to just clean this up and finish it off as quickly as they can. That'll play to their strengths. And it'll also, like you mentioned, give them the best chance in the next round if they can also do that and not have to worry about that 3rd game. It'll make sure that they're as fresh as they can possibly be for round 2 on Tuesday.
Extra day off never hurts any team.
Never hurts, especially at this time of year. Okay, we'll bring up the matchups again. The other one, Saskatoon and Regina. Of course, this was the second round matchup from last year after Saskatoon beat Moose Jaw and Regina beat Medicine Hat in the first rounds. They saw each other. So there's a lot of familiarity here, and it kind of feels, in a way, a little bit similar to the way that the matchup was last year. Saskatoon was top of the league all year long. Regina kind of came together late, finished off in 3rd, beat the second-place team, and then played Saskatoon, beat them. And maybe in a way, it's kind of a similar vibe, a similar storyline to how that matchup played out last year. Saskatoon's not the team they were last year. Not saying they're bad. They're just not the same team. They had 46 wins last year. This year, 38. So different team this year. Regina's a little bit different as well, but they still have kind of a similar feel to how last year's team ended up. Can this Regina team find it again and go all the way?
Your guess is as good as mine. That's a
I
great
have no
question.
idea. I have no idea.
Well, and the question mark for the Regina Red Sox going into this one is who's going to be this year's Aiden Page, right? Like he was an absolute beast on the mound
Yeah.
for the Regina Red Sox, pitched out of his mind essentially. And when you had an offense that started to figure things out, and a lot of those offensive pieces are back, Brady By, Jalen Myers, Ian Montz, Justin Samart. There's a lot of pieces that can lean on last year's experience and go, okay, we're not out of the woods on this one yet. They finished the season after changing coaches at about 500 in terms of the games played between the All-Star break and the end of they weren't lighting anybody on fire, but they also took 2 out of 3 from Saskatoon during that stretch. So is that a little bit of foreshadowing? I don't know. Saskatoon did win the season series 6-4. It might have been a little bit closer than maybe some people gave credit for. For Saskatoon, I think the big thing for them is don't necessarily have the horses that they have had in the last couple of years. Carter Beck, obviously, we keep mentioning him. I'll talk about him a little bit when we do alumni updates because a pretty cool story with him. But you still have, an Ethan Murdoch who had an absolute phenomenal year. I would argue is probably your top Canadian this season. You do have some young pieces who've really kind of brought themselves to the forefront. Josh Henson's name comes to mind as a guy who I was consistently mentioning during the last few weeks of the season as a guy who was picking up 3 or 4 RBI a night. Like Gael Salinas is another guy that I think they're going to be leaning on. He won the batting race as far as batting average is concerned. This Saskatoon team should not be slept on by any stretch of imagination. But there is that part of me that is going, if you take Regina too lightly, this can end the series really, really quickly. And so I did notice that they cooled off a little bit in the second half of the season here. And so I don't think Joe Carnahan and company are going to accept that. And so that's going to be the big piece heading into this series, particularly is, hey, who's going to maybe rise to the occasion and maybe get the monkey off the back? And for Saskatoon as well, maybe feed off of that loss from last year a little bit and go, okay, we have some skeletons that we need to get out of the closet here and beat them with a baseball bat. So that'll be the storyline to me is, can Saskatoon get rid of the monkey off their back because they've been a really good team? They want to get to the WCBL championship really, really badly this year, but they need to get rid of this little pest known as Regina Red Sox first.
Yeah, for sure. Regina to me all year long was just, I guess, similar to last year, was just confusing. It felt like they had a lot of the right pieces, but they could never consistently put together a good week. It was always about 500, under 500, just over 500. It was always around there. They never went on too many big streaks where they're like, oh, look at this. They have a 6 or 7 game winning streak. They're really putting it together. It just doesn't seem like they really had that this year. And Saskatoon, like you said, very good. Not just had a couple of monsters last year on their roster that it seemed like they could rely on every night to go 4 for 4 or have a big night or steal some bases. And this year was just a little bit of a toned down version of that. But like you said, Ethan Murdoch is out there to prove a point, and some other guys are out there to prove a point. They have a little bit different look to their pitching staff this year. Who's going to get the ball, I think, is another question, because they did lose a guy or two throughout the season on their roster. So it's like, who's going to get the ball for game 1? Who are they relying on to get that big game out of game 2? So we'll have to see kind of who they put out there. It'll be really interesting to see, and I think that's going to be a really good series because, like I said, you said it actually, I should say, Regina has a lot of guys from last year's team that had that magic spark near the end, and they're all, especially the nucleus on offense, they're all there. So they know what it takes. They know what happened last year. They're going to bring that into this year. Can they figure it out against Saskatoon? It's going to be really interesting. Okay, we'll talk about the schedules a little bit later on, Joe. Let's switch gears a little bit here. Let's talk about some alumni updates. Who do you got for me this week as we kind of wrap up this regular season? But obviously there's a lot going on in the pros and throughout the alumni that are interesting to talk about.
Absolutely. We'll start off with a big tip of the cap to our good friends over at Sentinel Storage for being our big sponsor for our alumni updates. I mentioned him a little bit earlier on as well. Carter Beck, my friend, he was making big news earlier on in the summer when he was the first round draft pick of the Atlanta Braves. Well, guess what? Mr. Carter Beck did sign on and joined the single A Augusta Green Jackets earlier this week. And he made his debut with the team, hitting leadoff and picking up his first hit. Actually went 2 for 5 in that debut, a couple of singles, and he also stole a base in an 8-7 loss to Hickory. Another big promotion of sorts. We've been kind of expecting this one out of the Atlanta Braves system. Can you imagine a day where the outfield of the Atlanta Braves features Carter Beck and Eric Hartman? Well, that might very well happen if these two continue on the pace that they've been going on. Eric Hartman, we've talked about a few times here on the show because he's had a monster year, a memorable year, a record setting year, however you want to put it, with Rome Emperors in high A. Well, he got the call up, got promoted to double A with the Columbus Clingstones and made his debut on Tuesday as well. He went 1 for 5, 2 runs scored, and a stolen base as well, because that's what he does, is steal bases. An 11-9 extra innings loss again to Biloxi. And I'll wrap things up with another former Dog who had himself an outstanding outing, and we're waiting for that day where we get to say Matt Tugboat Wilkinson is now a member of the Major League Baseball fraternity. He is in AAA right now with the Sacramento River Cats, and on Sunday he had maybe his best outing at that level so far. Went 7 innings strong, 3-hit shutout ball, struck out 9 in a 9-1 River Cats win over Tacoma. So really good stories for all Carter Beck, Eric Hartman, and Matt Wilkinson this week. And really cool to see so many of these young athletes who are going on to the next level, whether it be in Major League Baseball, affiliated baseball, or whether it be in pro baseball across North America, doing some pretty cool things. So it's been really cool, really awesome to be able to shed a light on the alumni throughout the course of the season here on the show.
And just to emphasize the Carter Beck story, just if everyone wants to go, if they're listening to this, and just say, Google the Augusta Green Jackets, because that's one of the coolest tie-in name and logo combos in terms of the region that they're in. It may be in all of baseball. Obviously, Augusta, when you hear Augusta, you think of the Masters in golf. Green jacket is what they win if they win the Masters in golf, but their logo is a yellow jacket that's shaded green, and he also has like a Scottish hat on, very golfy. So super golf baseball combo in that area of Augusta. Super cool team. Just wanted to give that a mention because I think that's really cool. Anyways, okay, let's have a look. Joe, thank you for the alumni update. Sentinel Storage, shout out to them as well. Let's bring up the schedule graphic. As you can see, all of the games will be played Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Of course, alternating except for in Okotoks. All 3 games will be played in Okotoks. You can see the times here if you're making your plans for the weekend, if you're in the area. Of course, Moose Jaw and Medicine Hat says TBD because that all just was confirmed like yesterday. So as of this recording, they haven't like nailed down the times, but game 2 will be in Medicine Hat, game 3 back in Moose Jaw. They just have to nail down the times because they had to make sure that they knew the opponent and everything. So the only game that's been announced for sure, Moose Jaw didn't know their opponent until late last night for sure. So the only game has been announced as game 1. But other than that, you can see the schedule there. So Joe, give me your last words on the hype for this playoffs. The postseason starts tomorrow. Hype it up for me.
I am really intrigued by every one of these matchups. And as we talked about earlier, is that all 4 of these matchups have some sense of, hey, can the pitching do what it needs to do? Hey, are the bats for real? Hey, who's going to play small ball better? And there's some really, what's going to be interesting is we're going to sit down. I know you're off next week, but we're going to give I'm going to give a little bit of a promo here. Is we're going to do these shows between every series. So we'll be able to do a little bit of a wrap up of the first round, and then we'll do a division final preview coming up on probably Monday, and it'll be myself and Ian Wilson, and then we'll be back again on Friday to preview the Harry Hallis Championship Series. And what's going to be fascinating to me, I think, throughout this playoff series is, as much as we talked about the, hey, here's how they did against one another, here's where, you know, we always seem to find the unsung heroes, the guys who step up in the biggest moments imaginable and have themselves a playoff to remember. So who's going to be that person? That's the question mark heading in. And what team is maybe going to take us by surprise, or what team is going to run the table? It all starts Friday.
Who will be this year's It might be himself. Who will be this year's Connor Krausen, who hits the game-winning home run at the end of the final series? Who will be this year's Aiden Page, who just comes in and throws 3 or 4 innings of relief almost, it feels like every single night, and shuts the door and allows a team to get through the next round? It's going to be great. I can't wait to hear that. Like you mentioned, Monday you will be back with Ian Wilson to recap round 1 and preview round 2. Those games will go Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week. And then, well, Thursday if necessary, of course. And then on Friday, we'll preview the final. It's going to be a great time. Joe, appreciate you today. Appreciate you always. Make sure you enjoy the ball because it's a great time of year. And we'll talk to you again next week.
Here's hoping Mother Nature agrees with us this time around.
Absolutely. Thanks to the guys in the back. As always, there they are. Hey, boys. And we'll see you again next week back on the WCBL report for round 2 and the final preview as well. Bye for now.
Playoffs? Don't talk about it. Playoffs? You kidding me? Playoffs?